Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining. We're just giving it maybe one more minute here to make sure everybody is getting logged in that wants to join. Looks like we have a few more people coming in right now. Okay, it's 4:05, so why don't we get started? My name is Tom Gilbert. I'm one of the co-chairs, and I just first wanted to thank all of you for taking your time to be a part of the Ecological Health Work Group of the Forest Task Force, and it's just heartening that there's so much interest in this conversation, and we have an amazing, diverse group of people with lots of different experiences and expertise, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this conversation. I'm just going to say a word about my organization and then turn it over to my co-chair of this work group, Eileen Murphy. So New Jersey Conservation Foundation is a statewide organization that works to protect land and natural resources for the benefit of all New Jerseyans. We've been around since 1960. We preserved over 125,000 acres of open space and farmland over that time. And we also own and manage a system of preserves around the state, many of which are forested, including an over 12,000 acre preserve, the Franklin Parker Preserve, in the heart of the New Jersey Pinelands. So we have experience sort of owning and managing forest land and kind of dealing with dealing directly with the issues at play here. So we're really honored to be a part of this effort with our fellow co-chairs. And I should note that Andy Bennett and Anjali Ramos, the other two co-chairs, are also with us here this evening. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eileen.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Tom. And thanks to everybody who's joining us. I'm Eileen Murphy, and I'm Vice President with Government Relations with New Jersey Audubon. New Jersey Audubon is celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. We're a nonprofit member organization representing around 30,000 people throughout the world. And our mission really is to connect people with nature and to steward the lands of today for generations for tomorrow. Just one thing about housekeeping, there will be opportunity for asking questions through the chat. Please direct any questions to Hi Garst. He is hosting the Zoom meeting, and he will be assembling any questions that people have, mostly on the process. We're going over the process primarily today, and he will select the questions for folks. If you prefer to say your question, you can use the raise hand feature, and we'll call on you and unmute you, and you can ask your question directly. But we're preferring to go through the chat just because of the number of people who are here today. So I just wanted to let folks know that. So an overview of the work group. A lot of you know this already, either from previous meetings or from yesterday. Some folks are on both work groups. In February, Senator Bob Smith formed the New Jersey Forest Task Force and invited the 4 co-chairs organizations to serve as facilitators for this group. The purpose, it's to study, identify ways where the state can best protect and manage its public forests. We want to protect them to fight climate change, prevent forest fires, especially catastrophic forest fires, improve forest ecosystems, and protect soil and water quality, among other things. We formed 2 work groups. As you remember, we sent out a survey soliciting opinions and recommendations from interested stakeholders about what the primary challenges to our forests are. And using that information, we developed 2 work groups. One is the climate work group, and that group met yesterday. And one is the ecological health work group, which is meeting today. The ecological health work group is focused, we're going to cover topics in biodiversity, overabundant deer, invasive species, pests, pathogens. We're going to examine, or we hope to examine, policies or decisions that are needed to protect our forest lands and to ensure their ecological health. I'm going to go over some of the questions. We put this in both of the work groups just to give you an idea of the types of issues we anticipate will be covered, not limited to these, but what policy or management changes are needed on our public forests to ensure their long-term ecological health. What are the greatest threats to the ecological health and biological diversity of our forests, such as invasive species, pathogens, pests, deer, loss of habitat, illegal ORV use, etc.? What policies and funding are needed to address these threats? And what role should harvesting trees play to help achieve certain ecological health objectives? So we are very pleased, very fortunate to see so many active stakeholders interested in the health of New Jersey's forests. So now, Tom, with that general overview, it's just a reminder of why we're here. Tom is going to go over some norms for work group discussions and deliberations. So, Tom?
Okay, thanks, Eileen. So I'm going to go over the rules of engagement here, which everyone should have received, and they were attached to the notice for this meeting. And this is really important because we're all busy, and we want this to be a productive conversation. We want to use our time effectively, and so I'm just going to highlight some of the rules of engagement that we laid out in that document. We do expect everyone to behave in a professional and respectful manner, and avoid any sort of attacks on people or organizations. Let's stick to the issues and talk about the issues that matter to all of us. Actively create space to hear everyone's voice, right? We really want every voice to be heard. We want to encourage people to be open to other perspectives and opinions and ideas, and really listen to each other, which I think is something that is too often lacking in our society right now. People are kind of talking at each other, not talking with each other. Arrive prepared and on time for all meetings. Make sure that you've reviewed materials in advance. And I just want to say that the 4 co-chairs, we've really taken all this to heart. Each of us came into this conversation with different backgrounds, different perspectives, not really knowing each other, and we've been just getting along swimmingly, and I think really kind of treating each other with respect and cooperation, and really trying to make this work. Right? We want this to work. We want this to lead to good outcomes, and that's only going to happen, I think, if we all sort of treat each other in the right way. A little bit about email etiquette. It's important to just think about the emails that you're sending. Don't misrepresent your email as something that might be construed as coming from the task force. Only emails that come from njforcetaskforce@gmail.com are official communications from the task force and the co-chairs. We'd ask people not to send mass emails to the entire work group, and avoid sending reply all responses to task force emails. Don't forward work group emails to contacts outside of the work group. And these are all things that are just going to make this more manageable and sort of pleasant for all of us. I think we've probably all been a part of situations where email gets out of control, and it just becomes it just bogs down the ability to kind of have any productive dialogue on an issue. Zoom guidelines, don't share the Zoom links with external parties. These are unique to the work group members for participation in the work group meetings. Please give your full attention and participation during the meetings and avoid external conversations or distractions. Because again, it just, we've all been a part of meetings where people are not paying attention and are distracted, and it just doesn't go anywhere. So we do, if necessary, and we hope to not have to exercises, because everybody's going to be good on good behavior. If necessary, the co-chairs could remove a work group member if they kind of fail to comply with these expectations, but we really don't expect that to be a problem. We don't expect to to have to go there. So that's pretty much it in terms of the rules of engagement. And lastly, I would just kind of remind people, just to clarify a little bit, kind of what what we are and what we aren't. I mean, so we're not decision makers. We have not been given any authority to decide these issues. We've simply been asked to convene this process, right, and facilitate a dialogue to identify items of consensus or non-consensus with respect to our public forest land. So it's just important for people to bear that in mind as we go forward. And I think with that, I've covered the rules of engagement, unless Eileen or any of my co-chairs want to add anything to what I said. Okay, hearing none, it sounds like we're good and we can move on and get to the good stuff. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Bill Zipsey, who is supervising forester with the New Jersey Forest Service, and he's got some colleagues with him, which he will introduce as needed. I just want to say, we've been fortunate that the DEP really has been actively participating with us, and we heard from Assistant Commissioner John Cecil at the opening meeting of the task force, and I think John is with us again today, and we're joined by Assistant Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife, Dave Golden, who's also with us. And so we really appreciate that the DEP is participating and taking the time to share information. Really, the idea behind this is to give everybody a little bit of kind of baseline information, so people kind of understand how the DEP is dealing with and thinking about these issues, and we can use that, to kind of, build our discussions. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill. He's going to share a little bit of background information that hopefully will help to, inform our discussions going forward.
Hi, thanks, folks. Just going to get this set up here. Sorry. Yeah, so actually it's very cool to see so many familiar names and faces out there. It's pretty cool. Yeah, my name is Bill Zipsey. My background, I'm a supervising forester in New Jersey Forest Service, as introduced, but I also have a background in forestry and forest biometrics, as well as data mining and machine learning. Joining me today, I also have in the background that you can see pop out of the ether behind me periodically here, I have Bernie Isaacson, who has a background in remote sensing and is our resident PhD. I've got Lauren Gazerwitz, who just popped in behind me and vanished again. She's our climate and carbon specialist here at New Jersey Forest Service. And Courtney Willis now, who is our forestry and silviculturalist here at New Jersey Forest Service, and our bureau chief, Todd Wyckoff, with me. I guess just before I get started too, in terms of we're going to talk about ecological health of New Jersey's forests. Many of you, and I know many of you, which is really cool to see so many of you that I've worked with over the years on this presentation. We're going to kind of give a broad overview. I know many of you are probably used to, I give metrics heavy things with the biometrician in me, right? But I'm going to sort of give a broad overview and talk about some of the frameworks given your charge and some of the discussions here, and figure those are things that you could build on. And of course, if you have any questions or if you want help accessing, interpreting, massaging some of this data and information, we're happy to help, of course. So first of all, I looked through all of my old forest ecology textbooks and looked at some of the new ones too, and was thinking about, okay, well, what kind of underpinnings do we want to talk about if we're talking about assessing forest ecosystems or ecological health in them? Where does your mind go to that? And thinking about, so I looked at, there's all these different models for assessing ecosystems and discussing them and showing how they function. But the important part behind that seems to be, in all of the different ecological models I come across, it's always about the transfer of matter and energy in the system. So this graphic was taken from Watson Forestry in the UK, but the principles hold clear here too, hold true here, where you have radiation coming in from the sun, in this case, being converted by producers, taken up by primary consumers, and then proceed up through the trophic levels, and you have transfer of matter and energy in the system. And some of those producers, consumers, they die, they're decomposed, and then it enters into the nutrient cycle, and you have gas exchange, right? Some of these things, many of you are familiar with on this, but the idea about transfer of matter and energy being very important. Also, the biometrician in me tells me, okay, well, some of those things are very, very difficult to measure, right? So how do I assess that? So being trained in forest biometrics, we look at metrics and how the forest is responding. Much like if you were to go to a doctor's office for a physical, right? They don't start by sticking you in an MRI right away, right? Like they need more information to know if that's even necessary. So they start with some sort of basic metrics, right? They might take your temperature, your pulse, your blood pressure, maybe do some routine blood work before you come in. And then there are parameters that they can compare that to against the general population. So with that in mind, I know there's been a lot of discussion in terms of, well, what are the standards for forest management on public lands? Where does that come from? How do they assess ecological health? And there are a number of standards we do use, but I thought the one that I would mention here in this context that was most apropos was the Montreal process. So the Montreal process has been around for nearly 2 decades. And it is a system, a network of criterion indicators that are used kind of like to set those baselines of things that you can measure out in the population and compare them to see how you're doing in terms of sustainability, forest sustainability. Originally, they were global metrics that were used to track deforestation and the impacts of that worldwide, and then sustainability. There's a whole bunch of sustainability metrics. They've expanded since then, and they're revised. Also, they've been ported to be usable at different scales. So USDA publishes a metrics manual for this, and they also publish a series of regional and a manual appropriate for the United States, more in tune with like the United States in particular. So they're scalable framework. And if those of you have looked at, we're in the process of our forest action plan development process, some of that assessment process that was guided by this, the Montreal process. Also, those of you that are familiar with some of the forest certification processes, like Forest Stewardship Council, you can see the logos on the top right there, Sustainable Forestry Initiative. Some of the criteria and indicators used in those systems, they're taken from the Montreal process. So they're adapted based on the objectives and the focus of those certification systems. So it's an internationally recognized system, and there are nationally recognized systems that are derived from it. And that's sort of our sort of framework in terms of monitoring a lot of time in the broadest sense. In terms of how we evaluate these indicators, we couldn't do it alone, right? We're an executive institution. So the New Jersey Forest Service, we work for the executive branch of government. Also, we're a part of DEP. So we work with other executive institutions that have, specific knowledge. So for instance, our Office of Natural Lands Management, we seek advice from them when it comes to the handling and management of botanical resources. Our Fish and Wildlife, New Jersey Fish and Wildlife, the Endangered and Non-Game Species Program, when it comes to wildlife related metrics. We also have a very close partnership with the USDA Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. We're going to reference some of that data today. We do a lot of modeling and work with USDA FIA. Also, we do pay in to the system with FIA to enhance the system for New Jersey and send representatives to FIA. So For example, we collect double the national grid intensity of permanent plots in the FIA system and across all state and private lands, and remeasure the entire state every 5 years. Our staff is also trained to go out and take measurements as well, in addition to contracted resources. And then we also use remote sensing and modeling. So for instance, the map in this looking at projected losses from gypsy moth, that's a product of all of these things. That's a product of plots taken on the ground, remote sensing information, and modeling. Or the FVS logo there, our staff is sent out of state to actually train in this with nationally certified silviculturalists to be able to run these models and make accurate projections into the future. So the graphic with the fire in the treetops there, that's where that comes from. And when needed, and and this is something we could help with, we can create models of our own too, based on peer-reviewed research and based on the latest scientifically available data. So for instance, the 4MOM project is an open source project that's in development here, available freely, and with our partners, that's designed to look at the trade-offs assigned with forest carbon, associated with different types of management decisions that can be made on the ground. So all of these things are some of the points here, that like we have all these different systems, and we also offer being able to bring some of those systems together and utilize them in your evaluation of the forest ecosystem. I told you I wouldn't hit you with a lot of metrics, but the biometrician in me won't allow me to not completely not hit you with some metrics. But a lot of these will probably feel familiar, but just to give you an idea of what some of these metrics look like, and some examples of like when you start taking some of these metrics, how you could use them and sort of do a little bit of sleuthing to figure out their meaning. And this is good. The more diverse crowd you have discussing the metrics, the more interesting I think the conversations are. So for example, I think most of you on this call are probably familiar. I saw a lot of familiar faces from the action plan development process. So most of you are probably familiar that New Jersey has about 2 million acres worth of forest. That's about 40% of our land base, and that's by FIA definition, so it's fairly rigid definition. What's unique about New Jersey, though, or kind of unusual, kind of an outlier in the Northeast, is 54% of our forest land is publicly owned. That's unusual for the Northeast, with the state being the largest single public landowner. We own 34% of the total forested land base. So that is an outlier. Most of the Northeast is largely privately held when you compare us to other states. We grow, the gross growth is estimated at 117 million cubic feet per year. It's a volumetric measurement. We can also look at biomass growth and yes, carbon growth and transfer between pools. But the amount of carbon, the amount of volume accumulated annually is increasing, and I'll tell you why that's important in a minute. Very common sustainability metric is the growth to removals ratio. So this is where New Jersey is also an outlier in the Northeast and the Lake states, with a relatively high growth to removals ratio of 7-to-1. So growing 7 times more by volume than being removed statewide. So that is pretty interesting. We are an outlier in that regard. We have about 850 million trees estimated in New Jersey's forests. So if somebody ever asks you that at a dinner party, it is fun to know. It's about 850 million, right? That number is actually decreasing annually. So that's really an interesting thing, right? So that's some information. You know that the amount of volume, the amount of space that the trees are occupying is increasing, but the number of trees is decreasing, right? So those are some things that give you some information about the state of our forests. Also, when you look at a map of our forest distribution, aside from the little mohawk there in the center of the state with the sour lands, the northeastern or the northwestern and southeastern parts of the state tend to contain the largest contiguous blocks of forest. I heard some discussion and was mentioned today. I didn't really want to get too much into the nitty gritty of like, I heard some talk about like, oh, well, how is deer impacting our forest? And I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty because like I said, we're talking in 15 minutes about ecological health of all New Jersey's forests. But I'll tell you how I approach this as a forest biometrician and with our staff here. We look at regeneration, right? So off the cuff, could I tell you approximately how many deer per square mile we should have? No, I couldn't. I'd have to rely on our biologists and peer-reviewed work to do that. But what I can tell you is what gives me a signal to know that something is going on is we monitor regeneration numbers. You know, how many seedlings are coming in relative to the number of mature trees that we have or maturing trees that we have. And the proportion of seedlings that it takes to get mature trees, right? Relatively few seedlings survive to become a mature tree. And that varies by species, and that varies by site and by the community that's associated with that site. But we can look at that and evaluate it, and those give us some indicators. So again, when you go into the doctor's office and they say, oh, your pulse is a little high, it doesn't mean like they're going to stick you on a stress test right away, right? Or something like that. It just means, okay, well, we might ask you a few questions, start investigating what's going on here. So for instance, I can go out and take direct measurement, and I could see, well, are the seedlings missing in this forest because like they're being eaten, like there's evidence they're being eaten. So I could find evidence that, oh yeah, deer are eating them. Or is something else filling that growing space, like invasive species, right? Like the kudzu picture in the bottom right there. Or also, you wouldn't think of fragmentation affecting trees, but actually it does. Like you don't think of trees as being mobile. But for instance, the cottonwood seeds in that top left picture there, imagine how they disperse on the air, right? They can disperse pretty far. But now think about the hickory nuts below them, right? You have to have some very athletic squirrels to distribute those as far as you could distribute a cottonwood seed. So like right proximity of forested patches to one another becomes important. So these are, again, not to catch everything here, but the idea of how to think about some of these metrics and utilize them. Another one we hear people talk about is composition. So we measure composition. What species make up our forest? So anybody who's driven the length of our forest, right? It's pretty diverse in a relatively short span of distance, right? The forests in the northern part of the state look quite different from the forests in the southern part of the state. So this map here is a rough, very rough categorization it's called forest type groups. They're very general type groups, because if I listed all of the forest types in New Jersey, this would be an extremely busy map. We are a diverse state in terms of the forest types that are represented here. So I know some of you looking at this are like, oh, that green, right? You know what that is in the southeast. That's pitch pine, and that sort of gold brown color in the northwest. Oh yeah, that's oak hickory. There's a lot of different forest types associated with these. So I know that some of you might be looking at some of the headings in them and be saying, well, that's loblolly shortleaf, not pitch pine. Yeah, well, pitch pine is part of the loblolly shortleaf group. Or I know the one that hit me, I looked at, why is there pinyon juniper in the Piedmont, right? What does that have? Well, the eastern red cedar forest type is part of the pinyon juniper group. So these are very broad groups, but you can see that diversity. In terms of composition too, the most numerous trees on the left there in the little bar graph are pitch pine, red maple, and black gum, the top three as of 2019. And the most voluminous trees, the ones occupying the most space, are pitch pine, red maple, and yellow poplar statewide. So kind of interesting to know. And again, composition can tell you things about biodiversity. They can also tell you things about like where your forest is heading. So when we take students into the field and we talk to them about, what do you think this forest will be 50 years from now? An exercise we usually do is show them what the overstory looks like in that photo. So you see some big oak trees there. And you say, take a look at the mid-story, or take a look at the establishing understory. What does that look like? You see beech trees in the foreground, right? So what will that be in 50 years? Probably not oak, right? So in terms of putting that in the context, is it right or wrong that a forest is succeeding from one type of forest to another? Not really. But you have to put that in the context of, okay, well, what's resilient? How much can I tolerate on the landscape? What types of species do I want around? Where's the system shifting to? What are my risks? You have 9 million people living here, right? So those are all things to consider. And of course, I couldn't broach the idea of composition without talking about diversity. So I know a lot of people tend to think about diversity as like biodiversity, and then they make the leap from biodiversity to species richness, right, which is number of species. And all those things are important. Don't get me wrong, they are, but there's all these other elements to diversity too. Diversity is multifaceted. So those of you that have been following some of the climate and carbon discussions behind this, right? We talked about the diversity of different carbon pools in New Jersey, right? Different forests hold carbon in different pools at different proportions, right? And some of them sequester carbon at very fast rates, and some of them store it more stably. And there's a whole lot of gray in between. But we also have things like spatial heterogeneity and spatial diversity. So like this picture near Apple Pie Hill in southern New Jersey from 1940, you can see, look at that sort of mosaic landscape, how things are arranged on the land, right? We can have things like age class diversity or structural diversity. It tends to be tied to. I grabbed this shot from a series of them, that little diagram with the hand-drawn trees and graphs next to them. That comes from the FAO, the UN website. they have all this advice on like different types of structure. So I just grabbed some of these just to give you an idea when we talk about the bell curve, like, bell curve for even age distribution of trees. That sort of top figure shows, okay, that's a bell curve. A pulse of regeneration came in after some disturbance. Or a balanced uneven age stand, that reverse J right in the middle means something, but it means something really different if you have, say, pitch pine and holly, different levels of shade tolerance in the same stand. That could also be even age, doesn't have to be uneven age. And what that bell curve means, if you had that in pitch pine, would mean something really different than if you had it in oak hickory or northern hardwoods, right? So these are all indicators that we can look at, and we can help you interpret those things. Also, like for instance, we have density. So density here, I took this photo, the pitch pine photo in the top center there on Cole Road in New Jersey. That was a pulse of regen after a wildfire. And then being able to manipulate that, you have something like the Pine Barrens gentian, the blue flower down below that was a management project in conjunction with NJCF. So just making that little bit of growing space available had this response from a flower. Also, diversity can take place. You're gonna have diversity at different scales. So the idea of like how many trees are being blown over, right? Weather events, these things become important. So you can see all these different facets of diversity that can be measured. And you can't have a conversation about ecological health without talking about disturbance. So I wanted to throw some discussion in there about disturbance. Disturbances can be human induced, right? And they can also be, things that come from nature. So the idea here, fire, of course, all of New Jersey's forests saw some level of fire. We always tend to associate fire only with the southern part of the state, but a lot of our oak forests are also adapted to that too. There's pretty good evidence of the tribes, even pre-settlement, the Lenape using fire pretty extensively. Storms. So FI estimates around 8,000 acres of forest are disturbed by storms annually, by weather events. So we have Superstorm Sandy down there. Also human activity, so forest management activities. I was going to mention, like our growth to removals is very, very high, relatively high relative to other states. Actually, on public property, the impacts of growth, the removals on public property, the estimate of that is very, very low comparatively of that proportion. Southern pine beetle also, and insects and pathogens are also disturbances on the landscape, and they all leave different varying legacies behind. And not all the legacies are bad, right? So yes, you have dead material. This is a photo on the right there of trees blown down after Superstorm Sandy in a cedar forest. In fact, when we design management prescriptions for these types of things, so some of that we might leave, some of it we might manage and restore young cedar in, and we might nudge that along, but we're very, very careful about leaving some of that legacy behind. I know there was some discussion yesterday about, how much material do you leave behind? You always kind of walk this line of like, if you're going to manage a forest, you want to leave some of that legacy behind, because remember, transferring matter and energy within the system are really important. So knowing how that works is really important. The thing I find kind of alarming lately is if you've driven through Robbinsville or down 206, you see a lot of warehouses being built recently, or like the tremendous pressure with real estate prices right now, right? So one of my colleagues sent me this picture of warehouses being built. I think it was near Florence, and you think about that in terms of biological legacy, it's almost nil, right? And there's like this tremendous economic pressure, trying to shorten supply chains or hold more inventory stateside for like mail order, right? And that kind of thing actually is, or online ordering, right? Like that has a real impact on what our forests are going to look like. So something to consider. Although not to be alarmed, like people are a part of the system, and I think one of the hopeful messages behind this is, I mean, on one hand, you look at New Jersey and say, there's 9 million people living among 2 million acres of forest. What does that mean? I kind of look at that as, it doesn't necessarily mean the forest is unhealthy. It's kind of like if you were to take my physical and compare it to a 19-year-old Olympic swimmer, like very, very different results, right? But there's something hopeful here. Like, you can do good things. You can talk about ecological management. You can set examples, and you're within eyeshot of 9 million residents, plus all of the people that go between the metropolitan areas in between. So this is also to show pre-settlement humans were using this, right? The map on the right is actually a Lenape trail map. And then the map on the left is a modern road map, right? See some similarities there, Route 70 and 72, routes 206 and 70. Yeah, those were built on the footprints of these, of the roads of the people that were here before we got here. And they were active land managers. It's pretty interesting to think about. And we're part of this continuum. So with that, I realize I've taken about 20 minutes of your time. I appreciate that. Here are some sources that you can easily get to, and the copy of this PDF copy of this presentation, I believe, will be up for distribution, so you can find these and get to them. And if you ever have questions on any of them, or you want to know how to get data from them or interpret it, or you want to talk to analysts that have worked on this stuff, we can arrange that. So here are here's the contact information for those of us who are here on this today, and we can always get you in touch with anybody else if we're stuck on answering some of these questions.
That's great, Bill. Thank you
Thanks.
so much. That's really informative, and it has generated a few questions from participants. So if you're willing to take maybe 10, 15 minutes to field a couple questions, that would be great. So, Hi, do you have the list of questions there? Do you want to lay out the first one?
Sure. The first question asked, do we have a longitudinal study of what forests looked like over history?
So that's a good question. The question was, do we have a longitudinal study of what forests look like through history? Well, we have our FIA records, but they only go back to like the 1980s, right? We do have some of the good news is with New Jersey, we can reconstruct some of that. So aerial photography actually has been practiced for a really long time in New Jersey, relatively speaking. So we have almost 100 years of that, believe it or not, dating back to the 1930s. Where we can reconstruct what some of that landscape looked like. Also, like I said, a lot of the questions have to do with playing sleuth a little bit. So the idea about, and I have Bernie right next to me, which we've given a presentation about some of this before. And Bernie's had some practice where we've taken or has done some exercises where we've looked at historic texts and tried to reconstruct what those forests looked like based on some of those descriptions and trying to peel out metrics. Do you have some comments on that, Bernie?
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things it's a longitudinal. Hey, I'm popping out of the ether here. A pretty useful one. There's a PhD dissertation from the late 50s at the University of Wisconsin, The Changing Geography of the New Jersey Woodlands. So I was able to get that through the state library, and that's actually a pretty fantastic resource that points to a whole bunch of other references. I highly recommend folks read it. But so that covers 1600 to 1900. It does a very nice job compiling some other references that you can find from another book, Forgotten Fires, which has to do looks at native land use. And so there's been quite a bit of scholarship on that subject in particular.
Yeah, I'll point out when I first arrived in New Jersey, I arrived here in 2020 to work with the Forest Service, and I'd been a student of Wally Covington's out west, looking at indigenous forestry practices. So when I first got here, some of the things that I saw relative to, that were kind of hallmarks of the Southwest, I was really surprised to find them here. And, and so it was pretty interesting. When I first arrived here too, I actually tried to track down some of the members of the Lenape tribe, which they were relocated. So there's not as much direct history here, but I actually did email a bunch of them. I showed Bernie some of the emails when I first arrived here. And I had some phone conversations with them, and there were memories of stories of how these forests were managed. And that's what really got me thinking about, wow, there really is, it may not be like they didn't take FIA plots, but they definitely have stories that talked about some pretty specific things about how they manage these forests. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, great. Hi, do you want to relay the next question?
Second question, is it better to have higher or lower density forests?
So this is why I kind of avoided giving direct metrics on these things, because, right, the forest doesn't really know right or wrong or good or bad, right? Like, it'll adapt. So, it depends. I hate to say you're going to hear this answer a lot, but the answer is it depends. Now, I will say one of the trends that is probably worth, oh, Bernie popped into view. One of the trends that we have found is, especially in some of our fire adapted forests, that yeah, you have 9 million people living here. The fire regimen has changed, and certainly density by, as I alluded to earlier, growing space is at an all-time high. I mean, it let's say, you know, if I were taking the blood pressure of that, yeah, in terms of overall, if you look at the metric of density by growing space occupied, we do have some forests with where that is at an all-time high. And that has to do with alteration of selective pressure. But does that mean you should, you know, does that mean that's a one size fits all solution to everything? No. So just be careful with where you take that.
We'll pop back
Go
in
ahead,
out of
Bernie's
the ether
popping
here
back.
again. So better, something I think it's really useful for us as a group in the task force to think about. So better has a lot of connotations, right? That's a human construct. What we should be thinking about is what those consequences in the forest are. And so to Bill's point, and my research on forest occupancy in the southern part of New Jersey, right, there are consequences to forest density, increased forest density in some places that are different than consequences to increased forest density in other places. And so the question we should be asking is not whether or not that one is better than the other, but do those consequences align with our goals, those human things that we say we care about. PDF that publication to the group. I will get on that as soon as we are done with the questions. Both of those, they might be a little big, but yeah. So the better, it depends on what you mean by better, right? Again, human construct. So asking if the consequences align with what our goals are.
Yeah, and I would say that should be a data-driven decision. I tend, especially for public entities, I find, you know, we have to be able to show our work, like why we did the thing that we did. So like if you're going to make a decision to reduce density, that's fine. Just document why you did it, and, you know, and what you were trying to achieve by doing that. If you're doing it for water budget, or you're doing it for fuel management, or you just whatever you're doing that for, make sure that, you know, be able to document why you did it and what the objective was.
Okay, thanks, guys. Hi, next question.
The third question, is there a way of evaluating what kind of forest diversity is best for New Jersey?
Well, I hate to answer this with it depends again, but it really does. And that's why actually I think it's really cool. I see the number of people on this call and the diverse backgrounds on this call, because so on one hand, we could say, what does science tell us? But remember, science isn't about belief. Science is about testing things, you know, and questioning things. So the idea is that's also a decision for the citizens of New Jersey. So the idea of, okay, well, what is best for the citizens of New Jersey? What is it that we want out of our forest? What kinds of things, what kinds of things would we like to see in our forests? I can tell you about broad metrics about, you know, okay, is regen for a particular forest type, is that functional or not? What do I think is going to happen in the next 50 years with specific types of forests or species of trees, some of which I can do things about and some of which I can't. But the idea is being able to have a dialogue together collectively and making some decisions about that. I do think that I would say this, since you're on the discussion of public forestry, I think there's an important role there to be played in terms of setting an example. Because we are in a place where you have very diverse forests that are highly visible. And there are a lot of pressures being placed way outside of the scope of just the relatively small community associated with forest management or ecological management that are placing pressures on the country as a whole. And I think it might be something collectively to think about in terms of, okay, well, how do we set an example of what we would like that to look like and how we would like that to work? Especially because you do live in a place where some of the economic pressures of like utilization, those are quite a bit reduced in the state. You can see that by our 7-to-1 growth to removals ratio, right? You can see that by the fact, like, there are certain states that are like obligated to meet harvesting targets to like pay for their school system. We're under no such obligations. So those are some opportunities there to be able to talk about, well, what could ecologically driven forest management look like?
I was going to say about, Bernie popping in again. There we go. My hand shows up about diversity and spatial diversity, right? What makes sense in one, so an index of diversity, right? If we're talking about density from the previous question, spatial diversity, right? What might work in an Atlantic white cedar swamp where high density is has positive repercussions for forest carbon budgeting, might not work in the adjacent uplands. In those adjacent uplands, that high density might have negative consequences, particularly for risks to things like fire, for things like southern pine beetle. So so that spatial diversity, right? Like, what's the best kind? Well, it depends. There's a mix of whole things. I think we should just be aware of what metrics we're using, what we mean when we say those terms, and kind of be consistent with that.
Yeah, and I'd also iterate, I think it's also good to be conscientious of the trade-offs that you're making. That way, citizens, the legislature, the executive branch of government, we can make choices knowing what the consequences of those choices are, in an informed fashion. And, and so I think that is very important, being very transparent with the information and making it accessible.
Okay, great. I think we have time for maybe one or two more here. Hi.
The next question, what percentage of trees in New Jersey are invasive to North America?
That is a good question. I could get you an answer to that, but I don't have that like ready off the tip of my tongue. I can tell you that there's a suite of invasive tree species that are native to New Jersey, right? And some of you are seeing some of the consequences of that, right? Like for instance, tree of heaven, Ailanthus, right, is pretty closely associated with spotted lanternfly. So, right, we're seeing some of that in the state, although spotted lanternfly does seem to be attracted to almost everything.
It also matters what you mean by see there, right? Oh, there we go. It also matters what we mean by percentage, right? So there's a commonly cited statistic about how much of our food comes from pollinators. And when you start to scratch at that, you start to realize that there's a lot of dimensions to that. So proportion of our trees by number of species, right? That study about pollinators supporting food has to do with the number of different food crops that we use. But that doesn't correspond to the number of calories that we eat, and it doesn't, so our energetic needs, it doesn't correspond necessarily to the dollar value of the commodity prices, the total commodity cost, and importance to our economy of different foods. So when it comes to those tree species, right, are we talking percentage by total number? Are we talking by percentage in the landscape? Is there some sort of spatial index that we could use to say in one place the importance on that of that invasive species or non-native species in the landscape? Right. So there's lots of different ways that we could be assessing that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll also point out invasive species are not spread uniformly across the state, so that's important to know. And that invasive trees are not the only competitors for regeneration in the state. Courtney just brought up the proportions of invasive species. So I was going to point out also, right, I had that picture of kudzu, for example. Kudzu is a pretty serious competitor. So like if you get something, you can get plants that also can compete with trees. So Courtney has the proportions broken down in terms of the percentage of plots, FI plots that were encountered with different species. So for reference, if this is helpful, I'll read off like the top 5. Multiflora rose was present on 30, like that was present on the most plots with almost 37% of the plots statewide. Japanese honeysuckle was number 2 at 28%. Japanese barberry, number 3.
This isn't a plot statewide, there's an invasive plot statewide.
Invasive plots.
So when they're looking for invasives in the industry.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, there's a subset of FI plots for invasive because they actually do use botanists for some of that work. Japanese barberry at 25%, garlic mustard at 22%, and native bush honeysuckles.
Non-native.
Oh, non-native, my bad. My eyes are going on me. At about 20%. If that helps, that actually we could provide that information. That's actually in the forest action plan, appendicized in the forest action plan. That came from the USDA Forest Service FI, and you can see the complete table in the action.
Okay, great. Let's do one more, and then so we have more questions. I think we could probably spend all afternoon and evening here just having a great back and forth with Bill and the team there. But we will the questions we don't get to, we will forward along to Bill, and to the extent they're willing and able to provide some additional responses to those, we'll be happy to then circulate those back to the group. But hi, let's do one more and then we'll move on.
Next question, is the rate of decrease of trees more related to development or for forest maturation? Can you provide specific details and metrics for each?
That's a really good question. Actually, kudos to whoever asked that. That's so I will explain. So yeah, so the decrease in trees, that is relative to the amount of forest that is in the state. So that is normalized. That's a normalized result. So that is not as a result of development. That's actually normalized. So that's not what you're looking at. We can do another analysis where you can actually look at the amount of forest being lost to development per year. And there's two ways to do that. We have some of our academic partners like Rutgers, right? They've done remote sensing studies of that. And then you can actually tease that data out of their data when they have plots that are no longer forested and they become developed. It's not something that like you can tease that out of their data set. It's not like as easily queryable as some of the numbers, but the short answer to that question is, yeah, the decrease in number of trees is a biological function of those forests, right? An ecological function of things going on in that forest, because those numbers are normalized by the acres of forest every time they're taken and recalculated. But excellent question. Yeah, no, I really appreciate the dialogue. And those of you who know me, right, like I love the back and forth. Like I love that. So please feel free to reach out anytime with this stuff.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Bill. Thanks, Bernie. Really helpful background and Q&A, and we appreciate your time and any additional responses you may be able to provide to the other questions that we weren't able to get to. So with that, we're going to move on, and I'm going to turn it back to Eileen, and she's going to talk. We're going to start to walk through a little bit more details about how this whole process is going to unfold from here.
Great. Thank you, Tom. So how is this going to work? Well, the way that we've set this up, and we've been deliberating long and hard, so apologies for taking so long to get to this point, but we were really very thoughtful. We did a lot of research, and we determined that probably the best way, not probably, but the best way to generate recommendations on our forests is from you. So we are asking you, the stakeholders, the participants in this work group, to generate recommendations through a proposal submission process. We have experts here who've been involved in and care about forests throughout the state. We have people who have an interest, who've been working on forest interest for years, even decades. And that's where the ideas for recommendations should emanate, and that's where they will emanate. If you submit a proposal, we are going to call you the proposal sponsor. So when you submit a proposal, the point of contact, because there might be multiple people on a proposal. In fact, we encourage that. We encourage collaboration. The point of contact will be the proposal sponsor. And we're going to talk about the actual submission a little bit later. We're going to go over an example, but we wanted to go over like this whole process of submitting a proposal and deliberating about it. Again, we encourage collaborative proposals, and we're looking to find consensus issues. Many of you know each other already, or some of you know each other by reputation. Some of you may want to tap the expertise of DEP or another government entity, or our very vast and excellent university system, including community colleges. Some of you might prefer to work alone or work with another organization that you know and trust. All of those options are fine for submitting a proposal. We do prefer that the proposal sponsors who have similar ideas work together, because in the end, we're going to group similar ideas anyway. So the more people that you have, the more brain power you have working on your idea, on your recommendation, the stronger it is likely to be. But again, it's up to you how you want to work together. Our goal is to reach consensus on all or some, many of the proposals that are submitted. So based on what is submitted, the first round of proposals will be due June 30th. There's a couple of actions that we four co-chairs will take. Well, for this work group, it'll be Tom and I. For the climate work group, it will be Anjali and Andy. Although, as you can see, all four of us have some involvement in both work groups. And that's because we do recognize that there will be topics that kind of fall in between the two work groups. We're aware of that, and it's the reason why Tom and I will participate in climate, Anjali and Andy will participate in ecological health. But when the proposals are submitted, we may group similar proposals together for discussion purposes. You know, if we have a lot on deer management and the recommendation is similar for 5 proposals, we are likely to group those 5 proposals together. We may reach out to proposal sponsors, maybe to those 5 proposal sponsors, and ask them to work together. You know, work together on this topic. It's very similar. Maybe we cull the 5 proposal submissions into one strong recommendation from multiple stakeholders. We would make, in those instances, we would make the introduction of the proposal sponsors and connect you. And then a third option is we might find that there are conflicting or diverging recommendations. In fact, this is likely to happen, in which case we may develop subgroups. We may invite you to participate in a subgroup where you'll really get into the nuts and bolts of that particular topic and hammer it out. Again, our goal is that you'll reach consensus. You may not, in which case we will have other routes for discussion. We intend to have meetings, focused meetings after this. We're meeting every 2 weeks. The next meeting actually is to help with proposal development. But after that, each meeting will focus on particular proposals or proposal topics. So throughout the summer, every 2 weeks, the discussions of the work group will be to discuss submitted proposals, groups of proposals, singular proposals, or the formation of subgroups. It is here in this work group or subgroups where the substantive discussions are going to occur. I know that a lot of you are chomping at the bit to talk, and you are going to have that opportunity. It is in these, it's difficult with such a large group, but we are encouraging discussion and collaboration. This is where we want to reach consensus on those proposals. We're going to, Tom and I will be the facilitators. We will either present the proposal topics ourselves to the work group. We may ask one proposal sponsor or a group of sponsors to present a recommendation, and then we will facilitate the discussion. A lot of it depends on what we receive. If we receive 5 proposals, that's kind of easy to manage. If we receive 500 proposals, that will take us a little bit more time. We may call upon participants to help us more in that instance than if we get less. We do anticipate rigorous, open, and honest discussion to get us to that consensus goal on the topics where we share interest and concern. Again, June 30th, the due date for the first round of proposals. Then we'll have a series of meetings to discuss them. And then there'll be an opportunity for a second round of proposals due August 31st, with again, another meeting designed to help people with their preparation of proposals, followed by discussions of the proposals that are presented. So in summary, you're the heart and soul of these work groups. You will submit your recommendations via a short online proposal form. Proposals are grouped by topic. Subgroups may be formed. We have discussion to reach consensus. So now that segues into Tom, who's going to talk about the process for reaching consensus. Unless you have anything to add about anything I might have missed about structure, Tom, or Anjali or Andy.
No, I think you covered it, Eileen. And when we get to the clarifying questions, you know, people can flag if they have questions. So in terms of consensus, so the charge to us from Senator Smith was clearly to identify, you know, where we have consensus and where we don't when it comes to protection and management of our public forest land. So, you know, that's the goal, and you know, it's a high bar. You know, consensus is challenging, but that's, you know, that's really what we're all working toward. Just a word about consensus. As you probably know, consensus doesn't mean unanimity. We're not looking for 100% agreement on an item, but consensus is clearly the vast majority of participants being in agreement. There can be a small number of dissenters and still reach consensus. So that's our goal. The four co-chairs have discussed that, if necessary, we want to put in place some mechanisms where if consensus is unattainable, that we might have some mechanism for voting on issues to determine if we have and again, this wouldn't be a situation where we'd be looking for a simple 51-49 split on something, which would be pretty much non-consensus. But we recognize these are complex issues. This is a very large group. We've got a lot of different perspectives. We've got a lot of passionate points of view when it comes to these issues, and so we don't want to be unrealistic and think that it's going to be easy for us to reach consensus on every issue, but that's very much going to be our goal. And we're developing some additional guidelines and parameters to kind of deal with kind of a voting process if necessary, but that will be the last resort. So at the end, sort of every proposal that comes forward, as long as it's germane to our charge, as long as it is has all the necessary information, it will be discussed, and we'll make a determination after discussion as to whether that's an item that is a consensus item, whether it's a non-consensus item, or maybe in some cases whether it's something that we actually put to a vote. There's other options that we might have short of that the co-chairs will consider. Our goal is to try to forge consensus. I think we all agree, the four of us, that we want to try to be hands-on and see where we can help to foster consensus. So in some cases, based on the conversations we're hearing, we might suggest and ask the sponsors of a proposal, but would you consider a modification to your proposal that we think, based on what we've heard, maybe actually could get us to consensus? Or in some cases, I think, as Eileen mentioned, we might ask a subgroup to work on an issue if we feel like this feels like one with some more conversation we could get to consensus, and we need some people, some interested parties, to work offline, try to hammer something out, and then come back to the full group, and then to see if we do indeed have consensus on that. No matter what, we're committed to making sure that everyone's perspectives are heard and documented. So, regardless of how we categorize a particular proposal, we're going to make sure to document the different points of view on that. If it's an item where there's no consensus, we'll document the different perspectives that were held on that issue. Even if it's an item where we had consensus, but there were a small number of dissenters, we'll document that perspective as well. So I think that's pretty much it on how we're thinking about the process for figuring out kind of where the group comes down on different proposals. I will turn it back to you, Eileen, and I think you're going to talk a little bit more about how the representation of different interests within the work.
So how people are represented, both for the determination of consensus and for the potential for voting, should we need to vote on certain issues. So this work group is comprised of private residents, of people in for-profit businesses, nonprofit organizations, municipalities, environmental commissions, government entities, organizations. And if you look at many similar task force or advisory groups or even homeowners associations, they'll often weight voting based on its representation. So for instance, a private resident will represent themselves. A large geographically diverse organization may represent tens of thousands of people. So we are looking at examples from across the country on best ways to manage that kind of representation. as a point of interest, before I get too far, the four of us, the four co-chairs, we are facilitators in this process, and we are not representing our respective organizations. Someone else in our organization will be the formal representative. So for instance, for me, New Jersey Audubon, while I'm here facilitating discussions, I will not be voting and I will not be representing New Jersey Audubon when decisions come about consensus. We thought that was important because we want to maintain a level of transparency and our role is as facilitators. For us, a couple of things. There are organizations that represent a very hyperlocal. There's organizations that represent regions. There's organizations that represent the entire state. We're going to take all of that into consideration. We're also looking at the type of organizations. There are conservation organizations who breathe forest issues and conservation issues and have a great expertise. They will be weighted differently than, say, an ice cream parlor, where we actually do have some businesses that have identified themselves and they are in no way related to conservation. Doesn't mean they don't have a voice. They most certainly do. But the weight of the votes are going to be different. We have not, like I said, we haven't worked it out 100% yet. We are still in the research phase, but we anticipate that we will have that outlined in time for the next meeting. Let's see. Yeah, at any rate, every participant, every individual has a voice, every one of them. And they will be represented either with their own individual vote or with an organizational vote. For the organizations and government entities, we are asking that you identify one person to represent the organization. And that will make it easier for us to count. This is really for consensus and voting purposes. More than one person from an organization can participate. And in fact, we have that in this work group. We have multiple staff or members of organizations participating. But when it comes to looking for consensus, when it comes to voting, we are asking for a formal identification of a representative. And we will have a form. We have an online form to which there'll be an opportunity to upload a letter, very brief letter on your organization's letterhead designating who that representative is going to be. But again, multiple members of the organization can participate in discussions. Multiple members can submit proposals, but only one individual will represent the organization for the purposes of consensus. An organization can differentiate by work group. It might be that they ask for one person to be the representative on climate and someone else to be the representative on ecological health. That's fine. But then we will also need you to identify who's the overall. So if we're doing work group wide decisions, which one of those two represents is the umbrella representative versus the work group representatives. Again, before the next meeting, we hope to firm this up. And we will have guidelines. For instance, you might be a board member, you're not a paid staff, but if you're a board member on an organization, we would consider you part of that organization to be represented by that organization. Some of you are board members on several organizations. In those cases, we're going to do a case-by-case assessment because we want your participation. We appreciate that you are devoting your time to multiple organizations, and then we will work with you to determine how you will be represented on the work group. I guess that's all I have to say on that, other than the meeting dates. I already went over June 30th is going to be the due date for round 1 of the proposals. We are having a meeting on June 21st. It's optional. That's for people who want help with their proposals. maybe you're having a little trouble articulating exactly what your recommendation is and you'd like a little assistance, that's going to be the purpose of that meeting on June 21st. And then after June 30th, every 2 weeks, we'll meet to discuss proposals. July 12th, July 26th, and you'll be getting a copy of this. August 16th, this was in the agenda actually that was sent out, and then August 30th. For June 30th, we'll receive proposals. If we get 5, you'll likely get them the next day to review. We'll be able to review them. The time between June 30th and when the work group will receive the proposals and accompanying materials depends on the number that we get. So if we do get an overwhelming number of proposals, we may have to look at the timelines a little bit more closely, because again, we want every proposal to be reviewed and considered, and it might take us some time to review them, group them, and delineate how we're going to treat each one. So I think that's it, Tom, unless you have anything else to add about representation.
I think there was a little discussion in the work group meeting yesterday about some expectations for participation, right? So maybe just to mention that the expectation is that people will participate regularly, rather than, it's not okay to just sort of miss all the sessions and then show up at the end and vote without really kind of being a part of the conversation. So there is an expectation. We understand that people things come up and people may have instances where they can't make a session, and we also can make some provisions if in the event an organization needs to have an alternate represent them when for whatever reason. We can deal with that on a case-by-case basis as well. And I think we also clarified yesterday that it's okay for an organization to have one representative on this work group and a different representative on the other work group. In some instances, that may make sense or be necessary for an organization. So when they submit that letter to the task force clarifying who their representatives are, they should know whether it's they should be clear about who's representing them on each of the two work groups. So,
yeah.
Andy, Anjali, I mean, do we kind of pick up everything that we kind of went over yesterday? Any new wrinkles or anything that we're missing?
Did we mention the Google form that we're going to be sharing so that organizations can submit the letterhead document and who's going to be representing them for each work group?
Yeah.
Sorry if I missed that. Did you mention it, Eileen?
Yeah, very briefly though. Yeah, there will be a very short form to upload your organization's representative delineation on their letterhead. Yeah, that'll be through a Google form. Also, you can still participate without submitting a proposal, but we do ask that you be present. You're in attendance and you're coming to meetings and you're listening to proposal sponsors and reaching consensus. So you're not required to submit proposals, but you are required to consider them and enter wholeheartedly into honest discussion.
Okay, so I think at this point, are we going to see what clarifying questions people might have? And, I know this has been very heavy on process so far, and it feels like, when are we going to talk about the issues? But, the four of us felt it's really important that we have a sound process, because if we don't, it's just, especially with this many people, it's just going to be unwieldy and we're not going to get anywhere. So really making an effort to try to develop a workable process here. But if you have questions at this point on what we've covered so far, you can again send a chat to Hi Garst. You could put your hand up and we can call on you. I think we have maybe one participant on the phone, and I think if you're on the phone, what is it, *6 to unmute? Is that correct? I'm getting a thumbs up from Anjali. *6 to unmute, because if you're on the phone, obviously you can't chat. And if you're on the phone and you have a question, you can unmute and just say your name and say you have a question. So
Tom, but you still have to ask to unmute them. Even if they try to unmute themselves, they won't be able to speak because from the Zoom perspective, they're
Oh.
muted.
So
Yeah.
let's take whoever's on the phone off mute so that in case they do have a question.
Yeah. Well, we had a bunch in the chat as we were speaking, so let's take some of them. And then I see at least one hand up here. Please use the raise hand feature. There's a lot of you, and it's multiple screens. So in the participant list, we will see your raised hand. That's what we're going to use. But let's take can you take a couple from the chat? I know you've been tracking them. Clarifying questions on the process.
Sure. First question, there are a couple similar. How do we find a group to work with on proposals?
Yeah, we did talk a little bit about this yesterday. I believe the plan is we're going to put out a list of all of the participants. There's been some sensitivity about whether not everyone may want their email, their contact information shared. So I think what we want to try to do is at least provide a list of everyone. And then if we come up with a mechanism to people that want to share their contact information to make that available so that people could then reach out to and contact people. We really do want to avoid, though, like we said at the outset, if every member of the work group emails, the entire work group list, like we're all going to quickly regret that. And it's just going to be totally unmanageable. So we just can't have everyone, sending mass emails to the entire work group list because that's just not going to work.
Next question, what is the purpose of the proposals and who is going to receive them?
Yeah, the purpose of the proposals is to develop recommendations for the legislature. They're going to come in and the 4 co-chairs are going to review them and group like ones together and then bring them to this work group to discuss. So in essence, the work group is developing the topics that we're going to discuss, and they're doing that via a proposal submission form.
Right.
Next question, are we going to get a list of all the people in the group with their background, jobs, expertise, et cetera?
Well, we did just kind of touch on that in that we do plan to put out a list of everyone who's participating. We hadn't discussed, with the option of them providing their contact information. We hadn't discussed getting a little more background on everyone. I mean, that's something we consider. I don't know how the other co-chairs feel about that. If we could create another form, right, where a work group participant. I mean, we have that information already. We have at least what organization people are affiliated with. So we can at least provide, name, title, if it was provided, and organizational affiliation, and then contact information for people that want to provide that. I think we could probably at least do that. Do we want to go over maybe to Elliot, and then we'll come back to our, so maybe we can unmute Elliot.
Will the proposal, is it an open call for proposal topics, or are there some targets that you will be suggesting?
It's an open call for this work group.
Yeah.
So this is the work group. So anyone outside of this work group, we're not soliciting proposals. We're soliciting proposals from this work group. It's an open call to this group.
Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Elliot, but it doesn't. I mean, anyone from this work group can submit a proposal. The only caveats would be it's got to be related to the charge of the task force and the charge of this work group, right? So it's got to be related to our public forest lands. That's our charge. And in this group, we're looking at any issue related to the ecological health our public forest lands. Specifically, if it's a climate related proposal, that should be submitted to the climate work group. Does that answer your question, or you still need more clarification?
I'm playing unmute here. I guess, there's a variety of topics that could be pursued with proposals.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if the four of you have some topics that you want to see covered that you would suggest, because a proposal is going to deal with a particular issue, and there may be issues that should be discussed that nobody is submitting a proposal for.
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess we're trying to let this be more kind of bottom up than to have the four of us drive, what is considered. I think we put out a list of questions, and maybe we could read those again, of the kinds of questions that we thought would. Eileen, do you happen to have that at your fingertips? I mean, there was sort of a half a dozen questions that.
Yeah, what policy or management changes are needed on our public forests to ensure their long-term ecological health? And we can send those questions. Again, when we send the link to the recording, I try to put those questions in most of the correspondence with the work group. And their guidances, certainly not limited, but we're looking for recommendations. What are the greatest threats to ecological health and biological diversity, invasive species pathogens? What policies and funding are needed to address these threats? So I'd love to see a proposal with a recommendation for funding work on public lands. That's one example. I'm going to show an example. I'm going to show you the proposal form, and that might make it more clear as we go too. But this is the whole point here, is that there's a lot of opinions about policies. So let's hear them. This is your opportunity to present them and discuss them.
Yeah, we heard from Bill, regarding the concern about, forest regeneration, the lack of forest regeneration related to deer and other factors. I mean, so that's the kind of thing that, would fall within the purview of this work group versus the climate work group. So, I mean, there've been a few issues that have been suggested, but, again, I think with all the people we have on this work group, I have no doubt that there's a lot of knowledge here, and that we're going to get a very good suite of diverse proposals that are kind of focused on important ecological health issues in our forests.
Okay, let's see what we accomplish. Thanks.
We got a couple more hands up. Hi, what other questions did we have in the chat?
And next question from the chat is, can committees be formed around certain issue areas?
Yeah, we talked about that as subgroups, that if we see that there are some conflicting recommendations, in particular, if we see that there's a chance that with a little bit more discussion that we can reach consensus, we will form subgroups similar to committees. We're calling them subgroups. So yes.
Okay, maybe we'll go to, looks like Lewis was next with his hand up. Lewis Corman. Can we unmute Lewis?
There we go. Yeah, maybe you can help me understand this. How I wanted to try to find out how these proposals and the questions that Eileen laid out were different than those that were addressed in the, I'm assuming, already approved Forest Action Plan by the U.S. Forest Service, and the Wildlife Action Plan. It was approved by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So are they starting points for this thing? It seems like they would have, I haven't read them, but it would seem to me that many of these things should have been covered there. So maybe you can help me with that. Understanding the difference between these proposals and things that are already approved.
Yeah. I mean, my view on that would be that, you know, the State Forest Action Plan, for example, you know, these are the existing policies and plans of the department. And so that's really useful for people to understand. I mean, we can provide links to those so that everyone has those and can consider those as you think about your proposals. The difference between the proposals is, you know, it's the task of this group to think about, are there changes that are needed, right? Things that aren't currently being done now, or things that should be done differently. You know, we're going to produce a report that's going to go to the legislature. The legislature has the authority to set, you know, policy direction, right? And to
So I understand that. So that's why I asked the question, is it, we already have an existing set of policies for both forests and the wildlife that are supported by those forests. Wouldn't that be a starting point instead of having a proposal that would potentially come up with the exact same thing that's in the action plan? It seemed to me maybe that would be a good starting point for the committees, subgroups, whatever we want to call them, individuals, to start from and say, hey, I think we need to change those. Because it seems to me at some point before the legislature gets it, the, you know, New Jersey Forest Service and the Wildlife Service would probably have to make changes with their respective, you know, federal agencies.
Yeah. Yeah, we can share information about the State Forest Action Plan with all the participants. And I for one would encourage everyone to familiarize yourselves with that. And, you know, to your point, yeah, that, you know, that's an important baseline to understand what the current policies and plans are as proposals are formulated.
And the last clarifying question, because again, it may be in the forest and wildlife action plans, like are statewide. Do they make a difference between private lands and public lands?
Well, our focus is on the public lands.
So the focus of this group is
Bill, do
purely,
you want to? I mean,
purely
you
on
something about whether the State Forest Action Plan deals with all forests, not just public lands. Is that correct? Not hearing from Bill, but I think the answer is that, you know, Lewis, this task group is specifically focused on our public forest lands, not the full suite of public and private forest land issues. And that was
Great.
our charge from Senator Smith. He said we have more than enough to figure out and address on our public forest lands, right?
And so the public lands that we're talking about then, is that state, county, local, or just state?
Hi, I might be able to assist with that. I can speak from the standpoint of the State Forest Action Plan. So we do cover public and private lands, and there are strategies there are strategies for both in there. And there is some differentiation where there is differentiation on those. So yeah, I mean, you got to remember also the State Forest Action Plan, depending on what your objectives are. And I can speak a little bit for the Wildlife Action Plan because we reference it in the State Forest Action Plan. Remember, they're sort of broad sweeping strategies. Also, remember in those documents, we are required to adhere to the national priorities and address those. So everything in those plans are framed in the context of the national priorities. Not saying good, bad, or indifferent, but they are framed by national priorities, not just state priorities. Yeah, no, you raise a good point. I mean, I think there's definitely good material in there to use in terms of understanding, you know, what the applications are would be on public lands, where some of those things diverge. What are the concerns of private landowners? We reference a lot of data in there in terms of what, like how those concerns are a little bit different than some of the public lands objectives. So I do think
thanks.
Really good material to draw on.
Yeah, good. So I guess back to Tom and Eileen, again,
I'm sorry, we need
this
to
group-
move on, and there are a lot of people with questions, which we are going to answer. But it's not fair for one person to dominate.
I could have asked my question. I could have asked my question by that time. So, well, as I'm saying, the only shot I'm going to get is our group just focused on state forests?
Public.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
No, I think that's an important question. I mean,
Okay.
my view is that we're talking about public forest lands, so that wouldn't be limited to just state lands.
That's
Any
not
of-
limited to state lands.
It's not limited to state lands. My fellow co-chairs can disagree.
No,
I,
agree.
we've said all along, Anjali's thumbs up, that we've been talking about public forest land, which could obviously include, state, county, municipal, public forest land.
Okay, I think it's important to bracket it, so thanks for doing that. And if there's any clarification later, I'm sure you'll let us know. Thanks.
So Eileen, do you want to go through, just so we don't run out of time, you want to go through the form so people are clear on how to submit that, and then with whatever time we have left, we'll continue working through questions?
Yeah, because a lot of the questions had to do with the form. So let's do that now. And then, like you said, if there's additional time, we will take more questions. So Tom, give me a thumbs up if what you're seeing is the proposal submission form. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little small though. Can you make it any bigger?
Yeah. Oops. I thought I could. How's that?
That's better.
Okay, so in the form, there's instructions. Please use this form to submit your proposal. We are asking people to include citations, whether those be PDF forms or links. If you do have links, you're going to include that in your narrative section. And if you have files, you're going to upload them. So we look for one proposal for one specific recommendation that can be included in legislation relating to protection or management of forest. If you have more than one, we ask you to submit 2 separate proposals rather than putting too much in any one, because we are going to be using these to formulate our discussions. The due date. If you are submitting a proposal on behalf of an organization, there is a question here. Ensure that your organization has reviewed and approved. And also indicate if you're submitting this alone or if you have collaborators. I've also given some guidance to label the files. And the reason for this is that all of the uploaded files go into the same folder, and we have no way of knowing which files are yours except for this way. So it's the work group name, ecological health dot your last name, or the last name of the point of contact if it's a group, and then a little description of what that file is. So here I just use Dear Management 1, Dear Management 2. It could be something else. Really, the most important thing is to put the work group name and your last name as the file name. That way we can match it to your proposal. Be mindful of copyrighted material. You might have access to an article through your university or through your institution that's copyrighted and that you're not really supposed to share. So what I did here is I put a couple of links where you can find what's called open access articles. If you don't have articles and you want to find some, these open access search engines can help you find articles on your topic. So even though it says the National Library of Medicine, they list thousands of open access articles not necessarily related to medicine. You'll see here, I just put in the search word forest, and you can see the forest articles that are coming up. So please take advantage of these search engines to locate scientific, technical documents that validate or back up your recommendation in your proposal. So here we go, your email. So I'm going to use my New Jersey Audubon email. I'm submitting it on behalf of my organization. Here's my name. Now, for my particular recommendation, I talked to Tom, and he's going to be a collaborator with me on here. So I'm going to add his name as my one additional submitter. He's in this particular example, I'm working with one other person. The organization of record, the point of contact would be my point of contact. So that would be New Jersey Audubon, which I misspelled. Okay. Additional organizations, well, that would be Tom, New Jersey Conservation Foundation. Has your organization signed off on this submission? It ought to always be yes, but there might be instances where you didn't have time to have your organization review it. Just check no. It doesn't mean you can't submit. It's just another piece of information. If you're submitting as a private resident, you are your organization. So if you're submitting a proposal alone as a private resident, you would click yes there. Then you would click, this is the ecological health work group. And for this particular topic, my topic, the example is not forest relating. It's about staffing. In general, I'm going to talk about staffing. That's my general topic area. The title for my topic here, I want it to be as descriptive as possible, is, I think that employees at my organization should get a raise. That's a very specific recommendation. I want them to get a raise. And now here's an opportunity for me to put my narrative. So I'm going to give you an example of not a very good recommendation. I'm just letting you know staff are very important to me. They work so hard. They should be protected. Their work should be acknowledged. I'm really making a case that my staff are hardworking and that they should be cared for. But there's no recommendation in there. So we really are looking for something more specific. So related to that, a more focused recommendation might be something like this. Staff at my organization should get a raise. Research has shown that employees who get raises or bonuses are more productive. And there's my citation. There's my scientific proof backing up my statement that employees who get raises are more productive. Now I'm citing a Human Resources Professional Association study that shows that pay is linked to job satisfaction. And I show that citation. Further, and those are the first two are from peer-reviewed journals. The second one is from a reputable organizational report. And then this third one is a newspaper article, a New York Times article, I cite it, referenced several studies that indicate employees are happier. My conclusion, given the research and articles in the public sphere, it is appropriate for my staff at my organization to get a raise. Now, this is much shorter than 2,500 characters. The limit for a proposal is 2,500 characters, not words, and that's about 1 page. So you have about one, and that's kind of common for grant proposals to get your idea across and cite your contentions here, 1 full page of narrative. Now we have 2 different places, as you might have paid attention. I talked about peer-reviewed literature. I talked about organizational reports, and I talked about a newspaper article. So they're kind of different. We might weigh those references a little bit differently. The cream of the crop are peer-reviewed literature. So we are separating that. So here we have an opportunity. You can add up to 10 files in each category. And here are my peer-reviewed articles using my format. I'm going to move them in using the format that I showed earlier. So those are my 3. I have Ecological Health, Murphy, and here I use the title of the journal as my descriptor. So this way, when I go into the file, my proposal, my references will be easy to find and match with my proposal. So I'm going to upload those, and I can do up to 10. So I also had some newspaper articles, or maybe there was a report in a magazine that I really liked, and they referenced a lot of articles, but they weren't peer reviewed. Here's your opportunity to add those files. And I have a couple of those too, the New York Times, and also that professional organization that I mentioned. You might include a DEP publication, you might a USDA publication. They would go under other, because as solid as those publications may be, if they're not peer reviewed, they would go under the other category. So there we have it. Again, you can put 10 in each category, up to 10. Again, the peer-reviewed category is the cream of the crop, but the others are good too. And then you're just going to hit submit, and it gives you one of these things. This is to prove you're not a robot, and I usually have to do these things twice. Let's see if it goes through. So it went through my proposal. Ooh, did it get submitted? Or did I might have missed something. What did I miss? Da, 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 da. Okay, submit. Oh, I didn't do the CAPTCHA right. Here we go. It's taking a minute. And the more uploads you have, the longer the longer the submission will take. So here it is. My response has been recorded. 2 things to note. If after you submit your proposal, you talk to one of us or you talk to a colleague and you want to adjust it, you can go in here and edit your response. We made it editable. As you learn more, if you want to strengthen your proposal, you have an opportunity to do that. And again, if you want to submit a second proposal, you have an opportunity to do that as well. So that's the proposal process. We tried to make it easy but effective. Tom or Anjali or Andy, anything to add about the proposal submission?
No, Eileen, that's good. I mean, just to reiterate that obviously, the more proposals can be backed by sound science, by peer-reviewed science, the better. That's why I think we created that separate place to identify those studies. But obviously there are additional sources and resources that are helpful to back up proposals as well.
Right.
So we got about 15 minutes left. I think we can continue to take kind of clarifying questions. Maybe.
Yes. So there were a lot in the chat. Hi, can you take like 2 in the chat, and then we're going to go to raised hands again so that we're alternating.
Sure. The next question in the chat, can the difference between the 2 rounds for proposals please be clarified?
Well, I mean, one answer to that is we wanted to create 2 windows so that we had the ability to start working through proposals this summer. So we needed to create a deadline so that we had a first batch that we could start working through this summer. And quite simply, that's part of the answer. And then there'll be a second window for proposals August 30th that we can then be working through in September and October. I mean, the other difference is to some degree, probably, there'll be a set of proposals that'll be discussed before the August 30th deadline that, should have some bearing on kind of what comes forward in the second round. We don't want to see proposals that are redundant or that, sort of are at odds with proposals that perhaps get adopted in the interim. So, I mean, I know that would be my answer, but Eileen.
Yeah, we wanted 2 rounds just because also we're learning, during the course of discussing proposals, you might think of new things. So we wanted a second opportunity for things that perhaps were not addressed early on, or you might want to listen. Some people just want to listen in the beginning and take some time to formulate their ideas. We wanted you to have an opportunity to have that second round, but they're identical otherwise. The same principles, the same form, same everything else. So hi, one more from the chat, and then Tom, if you want to take a raised hand.
The next question asks if a work group member can serve in multiple capacities for proposals. For example, can a member submit a proposal for an organization, but also as a private resident?
That's a good question. I think we had that one last night, I think, too. I would say yes, you can submit. Tom, disagree if you think no. If you might be submitting, you mean as a representative of an organization where they approved your proposal, but you might have another idea that you're more comfortable submitting on your own. Yeah, you can do that. When we said a representative of an organization, that's for consensus and for voting. But my take is that, yes, you can submit multiple proposals. What was your take, Tom?
I think that sounds fine, you know, with the clarification that you added, which is that when it comes to determining do we have consensus on a matter or whether we, you know, to the extent that we put things to a vote, everybody needs to, you participate in one way. You're either participating as a representative of an organization or a business or a governmental entity, or you're participating as a private citizen. So you can't, at that point, you can't, you know, sort of have it both ways. You know, you're sort of, you're in a voting, from a voting standpoint, everybody's got to, you know, be clear about how you're participating.
Okay, I think Rita Alzamora has had her hand up actually for a while. In our list here, it shows the order that the hands were up. So to be fair, we'll go in that order. So hi, can you unmute Rita?
Eileen, I just want to add that Leslie Sauer, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name. Leslie, do you have the raise hand feature? I see you doing this and waving. You don't know how to do it, but well, I'm just flagging it for
okay.
Eileen and Tom. I don't think she can, but just
okay. I see her. Okay, so I called on Rita, and then
Okay.
just quick, we want to be fair in the order. Can you tell me when Leslie raised her hand so I know in what order?
She's been raising her hand for a while now.
Oh, okay.
That's why I read.
Thank you.
I'm flagging it.
Thank you. I didn't see it, but I did call Rita, and Leslie, you'll be next. How does that sound? And then, so hi, can you unmute Rita Alzamora?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Okay, hi everybody. I'm a private citizen and I'm not affiliated with anybody, although I do a lot of volunteer work with invasive species removal, scientists, citizen scientists identifying invasive species in the forest, and I've been on work groups removing them. I've also been part of restoration projects in the forest, and so I have a very specific focus or preference what I like to do. But I feel a little bit lost with the process here, because I think we're missing a main ingredient. Like what are the problems that we're trying to address? And I think when we got the original survey, like what do you think is the most important to you? And there was like 15 different things. Is it deer? Is it lumbering in the forest, et cetera, all that stuff. If there is a problem we need to address, I think that should be our baseline. What are we trying to achieve here? Proposals are fine, but don't we need to identify what is the problem first? Like Eileen, in your example with the hiring, you say, well, I think people should get a raise. Well, maybe the problem is people are not involved in their work and that they're losing morale. That's the problem. We have to say, okay, what's the problem? So for me, I would say like something like, I would like the state to get more involved in removing invasive species, okay? And then I would say, okay, well, you know, that's a problem. The problem is because there's a lot of little grassroots organizations doing this, and there's like usually a crew of like 6 people out with a pitchfork and a shovel trying to take a barberry, where we really need a more concerted effort from a statewide perspective, maybe controlled burns, and that might be a proposal to address that problem.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, in order to organize ourselves into like-minded groups, maybe we should all come up with, I would like to do this, or I would like to see this. I would like to limit the damage that deer do. And if we can come up with a bunch of wish list items, we can also, okay, I would like to work on that. And then we can collaborate with other people on this workforce.
Yeah, that I tell you, I mean, that's why we have some presentations to identify the problems, and we did identify them earlier. What the point of the proposals really is assuming, you know, I mean, because this is a knowledgeable group. This is not the run of the mill.
Right.
You know, street people. Let me finish up, because I do want to answer your question. we assume a level of interest and knowledge on the problems. So what we're looking for are the solutions.
Okay, can we have a list of the problems so we can have a starting point?
They like you said, they were in that initial, they're in the forest action plan. They're in a lot of the documents that are currently on the shared folder.
Oh,
And
okay,
will be added to the
that
shared
could
folder.
be our starting point for
Sure.
breaking out our little groups here.
Sure. Yep.
So like, okay, I
Absolutely.
would take, item number 3, item number 4. I'll give you my email, and whoever wants to join on that group, we join together. Because I think, I don't know if I'm the only one that feels this way. I just feel like it's sort of like you can't just jump into a proposal without addressing what you're trying to fix.
Yeah, and different people have different comfort levels with that. So you might want to listen for a bit, or you might want to talk to some folks before jumping in on a proposal. But I tell you, there are people who will be jumping into proposals like tonight. And that's okay. They're both okay. Jump into them tonight, wait a while, do some reading. Both are okay. That's why we have 2 opportunities for them as well. I'm going to go to Leslie Sauer now. Oh, you were frozen. We just want to get as many of the process.
Okay, one.
Oh, she's frozen.
Okay.
Okay. Can you please unmute Leslie?
Okay, it worked. Thank you.
Oh.
I appreciate your getting to me. And I really appreciate the sort of complex and difficult process. My main concern is that when we're talking about sort of describing the problems and what's going on, that the presentation has been entirely from a forestry perspective, because it's come from DEP, Bill Zipsey. Your references are like the Forestry Action Plan. I think there's some very core issues that are of importance to many of the people here that have not been brought up at all, and that people would like to discuss with a larger group rather than relying on us to bring them up. The most obvious one that pertains to both is proforestation, which is virtually like a word that isn't said in these discussions. But I think the issues of like this FIA is referred to all the time as the standard of measurement. I think we need non-tree ways of looking at the landscape that need to be discussed, that people need to be informed about, like floristic quality assessment and things like that, that really have a great deal to do with how natural the landscape is, how conservative and irreplaceable the species are. I also think that soil is an issue that has been left out, and similar to that, insects. I don't want to go on and on, but I think the non-forestry issues need time to be presented in the same way, because they matter as much in both sessions.
Yeah, thank you for that, Leslie. And part of our process, and we should have emphasized it more, is the bringing in of experts. And proforestation comes up a lot. So there seems to be a level of interest in bringing someone in to talk about that, and maybe having a subgroup, to talk about that particular issue in general. And I know there's several of you in this committee that would like to do that. And what we would enthusiastically support you working together, and maybe recommending an expert and submitting a proposal after hearing from the expert. So
yeah, it's new, and so a lot of people don't know.
Yeah, it would be worthwhile. Thank you.
We did discuss when we organize future meetings by topic that we might bring in experts to provide additional background information on those specific topics. We thought it was important to start with the DEP. The DEP is the agency that is currently charged with and managing our public forest land. So it's important to understand kind of what they're doing, what their current policies and plans are, because that's the foundation. But we do understand that we want and need to hear from additional experts and perspectives as the process goes forward.
Okay,
I just want to add something, Eileen and Tom, if that's okay. Leslie, you flagged soil issues. I think that's a great example of something that you can put in a proposal. Add some peer review literature. That would be amazing. And then why don't you just go ahead and as part of that proposal, as Eileen was saying, recommend an expert that can talk about soils. And so that when we designate a meeting where we focus on that, that's someone that we can consider bringing over to talk about soils to everybody else. That's it.
One other thought, I mean, we do have the next meeting of this group, which is designed to talk about, provide a forum for people to get help with proposals. You remember the date of that, Eileen? I guess it's two Tuesdays.
June 21st, June
2
21st.
Tuesdays from now. So we can put a little more thought, we will put more thought into how to structure that upcoming meeting. And it may be that could be a mechanism where we could find a way to get some information sharing about people that want to share proposals that they're working on so that people know and can connect is one possibility, right? We've got to figure out how to structure that, but we'll have some more conversation about how to structure that meeting 2 weeks from now in a way that maybe be helpful to people to wrap their heads around how to develop proposals, how to connect with others who are developing proposals.
Okay, I think Andy, I just asked to unmute you. Did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I didn't. Sorry, guys. My service is very disrupted right now, so I'm just going to try to listen.
Okay.
So we're at about 2 hours now. I see we have more questions. I mean, I'm willing to go a little bit longer, but I think we also want to be respectful of everyone's time and evenings. So, Eileen, are you okay going a little bit longer?
I'm good going a little over, and we are recording this. So if you do have to leave now, you can catch these last few minutes on the recording. So yeah, I'm happy to go a little longer.
All right, so are we going back to the chat, or how many more questions do we have in the chat?
We got a couple more.
Okay, let's take a couple from the chat.
Yeah, next question from the chat. Do co-chairs meet with Senator Smith from time to time to update on progress and redirect?
I can take that. We had an initial meeting at the outset, and I think he is interested in having an update from us soon, but we've had one conversation thus far.
Yeah.
Give us another one from the chat, Hi.
We're having a little technical
Okay,
issues
well,
here.
let's
Okay.
go to Christine Hepburn. She's next
Yeah.
on our hands list. We unmute Christine.
She needs to be unmuted. Where is she?
Let's see.
Ask to unmute.
There you go. There
I
you go.
just asked her. Christine, you can, yeah.
I'm done. Yeah, there was a delay, and I may have a delay, but two things I would request. I think the information about the participants' just organizational affiliation, such as, private citizens who are on a board, is not enough information. If someone's a trustee on a board, and I have board memberships on several, it doesn't tell you a lot about their expertise. They may have a PhD in ecology. They may be a banker who's very well-intentioned and knows and serves as treasurer. So I would like a little, each person, maybe a few lines of relevant education experience would be nice to know, but also more importantly, conflict of interest too. If when I'm evaluating ideas and proposals, I would like to be able to check, if the person runs a deer culling company, and is proposing that the state fund deer culling in all the state parks. Actually, I love the idea, but I would want to know that that's a guy that owns a deer culling company. Or if someone has some other, is a professional invasive remover or something like that, or is involved in some way in state forest activities already as some sort of supplier or something. I just think we should be asked to declare any commercial interest, financial interest of ourselves or our family in state forestry activities.
I know this is something that's come up. The co-chairs have discussed this a little bit. We can discuss it further. I'm concerned about a couple things. One, just keeping this whole thing manageable. You know, we got a lot of people here and we don't have a lot of time. And we just can't, I worry a little bit about getting bogged down. I also feel like, you know, none of us are decision makers here. It'd be one thing if we were set up with actual authority to make decisions. None of us are. All we're doing is trying to figure out, this is a stakeholder process. Like, let's just speak, you know, be clear, that's what it is. This is a stakeholder process to get a sense of where stakeholders agree and disagree. I personally don't feel like conflicts of interest have a lot of bearing on this conversation. That's just my, I mean, the other, you know, the four co-chairs, we can discuss this further. That's kind of my personal reaction to the issue.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with Tom 100%.
Hi, are you able to, anything in the chat?
Yes, I can unmute myself again now. So next question in the chat, where can someone find the link to the shared folder?
Okay, it was on the agenda, but I'm going to send it again. Either tomorrow or the following day, you'll get a link to this recording and then information, the presentations that you heard yesterday and today, and then the link for the shared folders. Also the link for the proposal form. So that'll all be in one email. So hopefully you'll have one email where you can find, you know, all of those links. I know I hate searching through my emails looking for where's the proposal, where's the this. I'm hoping to put all of those links in one email in the next day or so.
Okay. So I'm going to propose we go to 6:15. So it gives us about 10 more minutes to work through a couple more questions. That sound reasonable? And then anything we don't get to here, we can pick up again next time. You can email the njforcetaskforce@gmail.com. So I guess we would go to maybe Brian Kirkpatrick next.
You're muted.
Sorry, Brian, hold on. You should be able to unmute now.
My question is more related to process than anything else. We have two very talented groups working on this issue. There may, however, be points where one group comes to an entirely different consensus on the same matter than the other. Will the recommendation of the conclusion of the task force be something like there's not consensus on this issue, or how will those sorts of potential conflicts be resolved or addressed?
Yeah, that sounds like a perfect subgroup. If we see that there's conflicting proposals or it looks like there's some division, again, our goal is consensus. We would likely form a subgroup to tackle that. You agree, Tom?
Yeah, and again, because the co-chairs are participating in both work groups, we're going to try to flag those things before they get too far along so that we don't have a recommendation coming out of one work group that's totally at odds with something coming out of the other work group. So, okay, I think Emil is next. Hold on a second. We ask him to go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I just wanted to sort of expand on a previous question about the Forest Action Plan and the Wildlife Action Plan as being, you know, the background material. Those documents have an incredible amount of information in them, and they mention all sorts of issues and problems. But for many of the issues and problems that are going to take a lot of money to fix, whether it's deer, invasive species, pathogens, worms, carbon sequestration, you know, fires in the pines, you name it, you know, they don't often propose solutions to many of the most pressing problems because they're, you know, the money isn't there. And I think our job is to point out to the legislature what the most pressing problems are that are not being addressed because of lack of resources. And so, you know, there are any number of problems that are addressed in the Forest Action Plan and they're just, mentioned and, talked about a little bit, but then, there's not really projects proposed on how to solve them because no one's ever even conceived of having the resources to do it. And I think that's what we need to do, is conceive of having the resources and figure out how to solve these problems. The Forest Action Plan and the State Wildlife Action Plan have lots of information, and but that doesn't mean that those things are getting addressed because the resources have never been there. So, and what we have to figure out is what are the most important ones, given, and also the Wildlife Action Plan doesn't really deal with climate change much. It's, fairly old, and it does a little bit around sea level rise issues, but not around forest issues. And the Forest Action Plan talks about a lot of the most pressing problems, but doesn't really offer solutions. So we have to come up with those solutions and how much money they're going to cost, and get the legislator to try to do something about them. This is not supposed to be something where we just restate all the problems and then throw up our arms and say, well, we don't have any means to do anything about it. That would be a complete waste of time.
So I hear a funding proposal coming from you, Emil.
Right.
Possibly.
Well, not from me, from the legislature.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that clarification, Emil. Hi, you want to pull one more out of the chat?
Sure. Will there be an opportunity for those in disagreement with a proposal to provide their own arguments or feedback that gets connected with the original proposers?
I think we committed that the dissenting opinions will be documented. We've got to just figure out exactly how that's going to work, and whether, that'll be written by the dissenters, or whether, we will summarize the dissenting views. I don't know. We have to figure that out, honestly.
Yeah, it's a large group. I've been on task
Yeah.
force where you have 10 people. It's an entirely different thing. So
Right.
the voices will be heard, dissension will be noted, but how the mechanism for how to do that, we are going to be figuring out as we go.
Yeah. Let's see. Should we go to Larry Baum?
Hello?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Oh, yeah. I just want to put it out there. I was wondering why all the general presentations for each of the foundational Zoom meetings seem to be given with a active management prologuing bent by those whose jobs and funding come from such management. Like, why did the DEP give all the general presentations and nothing from forest ecologists, old growth experts, preservationists? And why are all the preliminary starting points like coming from New Jersey DEP, Audubon, USDA, US Forest Service? And how can conflicts of interest not have any bearing?
I'd like to take the DEP. Those are good points. Ultimately, it is the DEP that will need to implement any of this. That's the agency, like it or not, that will be charged with doing the work that's recommended. They're also the group that is currently charged. They're the group that is charged with protecting public lands. And that's the reason. It's because that's the group that's currently in charge, and that's the group that will need to implement any of our recommendations. So we needed everyone to understand the baseline. Like, this is how DEP does it in order to inform our proposals. The proposals don't have to agree with the current mechanism for how DEP manages. That's the point. But the fact remains that they are the DEP in charge of it and will be responsible for implementing recommendations. Tom, Angela, or Andy want to add to that?
No, I agree, and I would just add, as we noted a little bit ago, that we're anticipating having other experts, other perspectives presented at the work group meetings on different issues going forward.
Yeah.
And on the conflict of interest issue, you know, again, we talked about this. Again, to me, it's not an issue because we're not decision makers,
Right.
and also because of the process here. Remember, it's not like there's one or two or a small number of people who are going to have the ability to determine what the task force recommends and what it doesn't recommend. It's only going to be issues where we have consensus. All of you are going to decide, right, what we agree on and what we don't agree on. And so if you have, you know, one individual or a small number of individuals that, you know, have some vested interest in a certain outcome, they're not in a position to you know, kind of advance their agenda unless all of you agree. So to me, I think there's a safeguard built in there that makes it difficult for, you know, any conflicts of interest to really have any bearing on the outcome of this conversation. So we're just about at 6:15. I think we've gone through all the questions where people have their hands up. Anything else that's in the chat, we can look at and discuss, and we can, the co-chairs will discuss, and we can follow up at a future meeting or in correspondence. So I'm going to suggest we wrap it up at this point for today, knowing there's much more to come. And I really appreciate everyone's time and just everybody being, you know, kind of thoughtful and constructive. And we are listening to you, and you know, we'll continue to talk about the feedback we're getting from all of you as we go forward and do the best we can. I think Andy said maybe yesterday in the work group, you know, we're not perfect. This isn't going to be perfect. We're doing the best we can to have a process that is, you know, that has integrity and is kind of open and participatory, and you know, promise to keep doing our best to make it that, and appreciate everyone doing your best to make it that as well. And we look forward to you know, the future discussions in the months to come. Eileen, anything you want to say before we close?
No, just thank you. You've already invested a lot of your time, and you're going to invest even more. So we thank you for that. That you're not getting paid for this either. So we're here for a reason, and we appreciate your time and thought on this issue.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.